Help support the show by joining the Patreon or becoming a YouTube member. Also, hit that like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. Now we have an extra confirmed here. When Watson, the news about his setback on his Achilles injury happened, I got criticized by some people for calling it a major setback and saying that surgery could be on the table for Deshaun Watson. Turns out my speculation on this was correct, because we just found out today that Watson did in fact re-tear his Achilles tendon, effectively resetting his injury timeline. Now, what this means for the Browns and their salary cap position, I will talk about in just a few minutes. But first, I want to get to how we got here and how what this news was today really isn't all that surprising when you actually think about it, because I noticed this at the time when they announced it. And the thing I noticed was the obvious part. They announced it. The Browns are the most secretive team when it comes to injury. It's not, to be fair, something like an Achilles injury is easier to be straightforward with than it is to be about whatever kind of situation is going on with JOK, because it doesn't seem like it's something that's keeping JOK from being able to walk or perform like day-to-day things, because they say and have said before that he's able to do all of that stuff, but it is something that might keep him from playing in the short term or long term. And the same thing goes for like Cedric Tillman, who is dealing with concussions, right? There's a difference between those kind of injuries and an Achilles tear. You can be straightforward about an Achilles tear. Although other injuries, that's going to always be, no matter who's in charge, a bit of a gray area on information. And the reason there's going to be a gray area for those injuries is because an Achilles tear, that has a known timeline. That is a timeline that you can measure, that is very tested, tried, true. It's going to be somewhere between 9 to 12 months, depending on how aggressive you are with rehab. Something like whatever JOK has going on, it seems like there's no real timeline. He could be better tomorrow. He could be better by a year from now. The same thing with a concussion that Cedric Tillman's dealing with. That concussion can clear symptoms by tomorrow. That concussion can clear symptoms in like a year, right? Like, it's hard to kind of judge. So that's why they can't really say much about that. But an Achilles tear, well, they can say something about that, as long as they know that setback is significant, which is why they announced it. But them telling us straight up, hey, there's been a setback, before they dropped the news that he did in fact re-tear it, I mean, that tells you everything you need to know. They knew this was significant pretty much from the jump, and that's why they told us to be on heads up for this, so it doesn't come out the blue. So when they come out and they don't rule out surgery for a setback, and they straight up tell us that Deshaun Watson had a setback, then you know that it's not an insignificant setback there, right? Like, that part to me was pretty obvious fairly early on. And then you think about it. What kind of setbacks can you really have with an Achilles tear? Right? Like, it's not like he sustained another injury. They said he had a setback with the Achilles tear itself. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but it feels like that's one of them injuries that if you have a setback, you definitely retore it. Or at least it's a good chance that you retore it. And that seems to be what happened here. Now, a lot of people have questions about how this could even happen. How could you re-rupture an Achilles in rehab? Is that a common thing to happen? And from what I hear, from, looking this up, listening to what doctors have to say on it, Brian Sutter did a great job of talking about this when Aaron Rodgers was going through the Achilles injury. Now, Brian Sutter had a section of a video that I think really does help explain how this could happen. He was talking about Aaron Rodgers when this happened, but this kind of applies probably to what Deshaun Watson was doing.
Achilles tendon in the back of the calf is part of this gastroc tricepsuri complex. Achilles tendon shown right here highlighted, coming off of the gastrocnemius, the medial to lateral head, and then the underlying soleus. The function of this whole complex is to plantar flex, basically push down, raise your heel up off the ground. And so after you go through a surgery where you're repairing and stitching this tendon back together, for a period of time while that tendon is healing, you don't want to stretch it and pull it because number one, that could tear the surgical repair or could cause it to get stretched just enough to where it heals in a lengthened position. And so it would not be surprising at all if Rodgers is not doing a lot of calf raises right now, because that's still going to put a lot of stress just now 2 months after his surgery. So you think about all this together and the amount of stuff that he has to accomplish between now and potentially 5 weeks to hit that goal just seems like an absolutely not safe progression of what's generally considered acceptable and safe to get back to your sport. On a biologic level, whenever tendons and ligaments are trying to heal and regenerate and recover after a tear, your tendons go through this timed process. And there's little things you can do to try and help facilitate some of that, but it's not like you can necessarily speed up to this extent that biologic healing. Yes, you can work on getting your strength in the muscle back. Yes, you can get your range of motion back. You can do more specific activities that we observe, but when you were to look at the actual microscopic structure of that Achilles tendon, there's only so much you can do to speed up just Mother Nature in terms of getting those tendon fibers to realign, to heal, to grow back into their nice normal position. That process doesn't just happen overnight magically. It goes through this very complex phase where there's initially a lot of just repair, where rough collagen just kind of gets thrown in, things scar back across. And then the more chronic phase is this remodeling phase that can take well into a year, where those tendon fibers, those collagen fibers are remodeling, they're realigning, they're working slowly to get back as close as possible to that original tendon strength. When we talk about fixing these tendons, there's generally two approaches. There's a repair or a reconstruction. A reconstruction is when you take a completely new ligament or tissue from somewhere else in the body or a cadaver and you reconstruct the ligament. That's like the ACL, for example. We do ACL reconstructions. Historically, people thought it would be a great idea to just repair it, just sew it back together. Turns out it didn't work as well as we thought. So now you actually reconstruct it. The healing time is more of that graft integrating into the bones where you've put it into the knee. In the case of an Achilles, you're not reconstructing it. You're just taking the two existing torn ends, you're approximating them together, and you're throwing a bunch of stitches through it to try and get it to hold and then allow natural biology to regrow and refuse those tendon fibers together. And that process takes time. Now, the key part here that I feel like is getting missed in all this discussion is there's a big difference between simply returning to play and returning to play successfully. Because do I doubt that Rodgers is going to get back out there on the field in the middle of December? No, I don't doubt it at all. I think he's going to. I think he will feel like he's at a good enough spot with his rehab that he will suit up, he will start, he will try and play. And the media will interpret that as he's had a successful surgery, he's had a successful recovery, and think that now the standard is going to be 3 months instead of the typical 9 to 12. But that doesn't mean that there's something that's been compromised in that whole process. Certainly the tendon is not completely healed at that stage. By 3 months, the tendon is not completely healed. There's no way around that. And if you're pushing your rehab a little bit, you're doing more aggressive walking, you're doing more aggressive strengthening to get back that function, you pull on that surgical repair site and you can make the tendon heal in a stretched position. Muscle tendon units are very specifically designed with this length and sort of strength relationship, meaning how stretched or tight the muscle and tendon is plays a role in how much force it can generate. So if you take a normal tendon and then you repair it, but it's now a centimeter longer than it was before, you lose a lot of that ability of the muscle to generate strength and power to deliver onto the ankle. I think the fact that he's at the age he is, he's the position he is, the type of player he is, he can probably tolerate a little bit of that impaired function that you might get if you push your rehab along. But there still is going to be the risk that this thing ruptures. And then if it ruptures, you have to repair it again, and then you're potentially out for the start of next season. And so those factors are still going to be there. And I think we just have to be very careful with what we consider to be a successful, appropriate recovery and return to play time for a return to play time that is very acknowledging and accepting of some underlying risks and not trying to apply that specific scenario to everybody.
It seems like Watson understood he needed to be back in camp in July in order to actually compete for the job. I've talked about this on this channel a lot. How is he going to compete? He's coming back from an Achilles injury, right? Like everything that we've heard, all the reports from all the insiders. And I'm not saying they're wrong. I do think they were right about this, was saying, hey, the plan is to have Watson compete. The plan is to have Watson compete. The plan is you've heard this from multiple different people. The question I've never heard people ask is how is a dude who got an Achilles injury in October gonna compete for a job in July? Like, the timelines on that aren't timelining. This is a 12-month recovery, and we're expecting him to come back in 9. So inherently, you're expecting him to rush back. Now, I know people are going to say, hey, Kirk Cousins came back early, Aaron Rodgers came back early. Well, they ran the same risk that Deshaun Watson did trying to come back early. They just did not get re-injured. Deshaun Watson did get re-injured. This is a risk that can happen when you try to come back from this injury too fast. So he re-tears his Achilles. That is a big deal for Deshaun Watson personally. And look, I'm not trying to take glee in him being injured, but I do have to talk about other aspects of him being injured and what that means for the team. And what this means for the team is that Deshaun Watson is likely to miss the entire 2025 season. Now, I thought this was the case when they first announced the setback. This confirms it. A re-tear of this injury in January, early January, he has surgery scheduled this week, means even on an aggressive timeline, he's not even going to be close to ready to play until late October. And if he goes on a 12-month timeline, he won't be ready to play until the end of next season. So he's likely going to be on IR for the entirety of 2025. That's not going to be a surprising move when the Browns do it, whenever they decide to do that. He's going to be on IR for 2025. Now, the Browns have something called injury insurance. Now, we don't know 100% how injury insurance works, but basically, the Browns can take out policies on certain players, and if those players get injured, the policy cashes out, and you're entitled to some level of cap relief because of it. Now, from what I've heard from Over the Cap, is that the insurance policy for Deshaun Watson is around $44 million for 2025. What this means is that come 2026, you will get $44 million in cap relief from the Deshaun Watson contract. What this means long-term is that the Browns might have dodged the bullet here with the Watson contract, right? It was already something that they had maneuvered around well enough that it wasn't going to affect them greatly in any of the upcoming years. Now it might be something to where it's not really interesting to even talk about after a while because they're going to get significant cap relief from it. Keep in mind, they're going to get I think $5 to $8 million of relief of Deshaun Watson's contract in 2026 because of his injury. I mean, not in 2026, in 2025 because of his injury in 2024. So they're getting relief based off of all the injuries that he's had. They insured the contract after he had the shoulder surgery, and they're going to get some relief there. We're talking about over these next 2 years, what's likely to be $55 million of relief from the cap of this contract. $55 million is a significant chunk of that $230 million contract, and it means that the Browns have much less to pay on it going forward, and much less to account for on the salary cap going forward than originally anticipated, which means that this injury, while extremely unfortunate for Deshaun Watson, his NFL career was not looking great in October of 2024 when he tore that Achilles. There might have been a little bit of a sliver of hope that he could come back from the injury and compete for the job at the beginning of 2025. But from the reports coming in that he retore his Achilles, the team is saying right now, this is breaking as I'm recording the video, so I'm updating the information as we go. In a statement, the team said that he sustained the injury in Miami. The Browns say Watson will likely miss the 2025 season, and he rolled his ankle in Miami, so he was probably rehabbing, trying to come back from this rehab, again, being aggressive. And when you're being aggressive to come back from this kind of an injury, you run the risk of something like this happening. This is super unfortunate for Deshaun. I don't think his NFL career is going to recover from this, quite frankly. Now we're talking about a shoulder surgery that ended his season in 2023, an Achilles injury that ended his season in 2024, and then another Achilles injury that is likely going to end his season for 2025. For a player who was not playing amazing before that, he was playing actually awful before that, and a player who since 2020 has played 17 games of football. So he needed to play more football. This is the opposite of being able to play football. This is devastating to Deshaun Watson's career. It's pretty much over with for him. I would be shocked if he got another shot to like legitimately start for a football team. I would be shocked. And now that the financials aren't going to be as significant for Cleveland as they once projected to be, if this insurance does work like how most people think it does work, then that right there points you to what the future is for Deshaun. It's not in Cleveland, and if it's not in Cleveland, it's the team that invested all of this guaranteed money in you. Where is it going to be? Now for Cleveland, this allows them to use 2025 to be a clean slate and not necessarily rebuild, but just to move on from the Watson era, right? You don't have to worry about the long-term cap implications of this as much as you used to, which means if Sam Darnold is available in free agency and the money for him is reasonable, you now feel like that's something you can do, right? Because of all that money that is getting freed up down the line on the Watson contract. So that's something for the Browns to think about. And keep in mind, I know people are going to still use like the Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers timeline for Deshaun Watson comeback. If you re-tear your Achilles while trying to recover from Achilles injury, you're likely going to take it very, very slow to get back, right? So you can't just use the 9-month timeline anymore, or whatever timeline it was for Kirk Cousins to get back. You got to use the old 12-month timeline because they're going to be not as aggressive about this because they're going to be super concerned about re-tearing it again. So this is a 12-month injury for Deshaun Watson. I fully expect him to be out till January of next year. But all of that being said, the Browns have a chance to turn the page. The Browns have a chance to move on, and they're going to get some cap relief that is going to help them be able to do that. This does change their plans going forward. Even if their plans were to move on from Watson, it opens up options for them. So that is all that is going on there with Deshaun Watson, him re-tearing his Achilles, why such a thing could happen, how such a thing could happen, and what that means for the Browns and Deshaun Watson going forward. But let me know what you guys think about all of this in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.